Good morning. President Trump and the Japanese Prime Minister holding a late-night news conference last night after North Korea test files a ballistic missile. Good morning, everyone. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Welcome to Sunday Morning Futures. That missile test, North Korea's first since Mr. Trump took office. What message are they trying to send? And how should the U.S. respond? Former presidential candidate Carly Fiorina is here with me this morning. Plus, President Trump weighing his options after a federal appeals court refuses to reinstate his travel ban. Will he take it all the way up to the Supreme Court or rewrite a narrower version of that executive order? We've got an exclusive interview with Senator Lindsey Graham and former Attorney General John Ashcroft on that. Then the pressure ratcheting up for Republicans to repeal and replace Obamacare. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul outlines his own plan as we look ahead right now on Sunday Morning Futures. President Trump sending a message loud and clear. America has Japan's back after North Korea fires its first ballistic missile since Mr. Trump took office. Standing side by side with the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, during a late-night news conference, President Trump reaffirmed America's support for one of our closest allies.
I just want everybody to understand and fully know that the United States of America stands behind Japan, its great ally, 100%. Thank you.
Joining me right now is former Republican presidential candidate and former CEO of Hewlett-Packard, Carly Fiorina. Carly, wonderful to have you back. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria. Great to be with you.
Your reaction to what we heard yesterday and a weekend of plans with President Trump and the Prime Minister of Japan.
Well, I think President Trump did exactly the right thing. I think it was incredibly important that he and Prime Minister Abe immediately step forward and say this is unacceptable, it will not be tolerated, the United States will stand with our ally Japan. And obviously, I think the administration will continue to ensure that both South Korea and Japan have all of the means necessary to defend themselves against such missile tests. On the other hand, we shouldn't be surprised by this action by North Korea. North Korea doesn't like being ignored. They don't like being out of the conversation, so every now and then they're going to do this, and we need to make sure that we continue to pressure China to behave appropriately, which they most certainly have not for years, and that we have all of the necessary deterrence capability in place.
Well, he certainly has been focused a lot on foreign policy in these first 21 days. Tomorrow, apparently, he's meeting with the president of Canada as well. So he's got another bilateral trade talk meeting on deck. How's he doing so far, Carly? And you have a great vantage point to talk to this. You are a former opponent and have watched his performance. Is he bringing the party together? How would you grade Donald Trump so far?
Well, first, I think we have to acknowledge that substantial change of any kind, and he was hired, he was voted into office by the American people to bring about substantial change, always creates substantial resistance. And so support has to be built in order to make that substantial change sustainable. I start with that because how things get done is as important as what gets done when you're trying to build support and sustain substantial change. And so I do think it's important for Mr. Trump, President Trump, to think about how he gets things done and to build support. I completely agree with him that bilateral trade negotiations are far more effective for this country than multilateral negotiations, which is why he needs to build alliances and build support and build friendships rather than antagonize our allies. It's also why, if I may, he ought to, in my opinion, drop this court battle with regard to the vetting of refugees, go back to his Attorney General, his Secretary of State, his Secretary of Homeland Security, ask the three of them to come back to him in 30 days with a comprehensive program to tighten security, tighten our refugee and visa programs, and then sell that to the American people. I think the American people want substantial change, but in order for that change to be sustained, he must build support. And so how things get done now matters with our allies as well as here at home.
Yeah, I think you make some great points. So on the one hand, in terms of the bilateral trade deals, I was speaking with the CEO of a business last night, and he said, imagine if I did a deal with 20 players. I mean, of course, at the end of the day, you're probably going to end up favoring one player over the other 19. The bilateral, if you can actually get it done, would probably be much more advantageous to America. On the court, let's talk about that for a second, because what we're hearing from the Trump administration this morning is that they may very well come out with a new executive order, one that is a little more narrow than what we saw initially. And you're right, he did not have his team in place when he first came out with that executive order on the travel ban. There was stalling tactics going on at the confirmation hearings.
That's right. And so now he does have a great team in place with his Attorney General, with Secretary Tillerson, with Homeland Security, and he ought to ask that team to come forward with their recommendations. And then those recommendations ought to be sold to Congress so that allies are created and sold to the American people. Look, I think the vast majority of Americans understand we need to tighten our security. We need to tighten our vetting procedures. We need to understand who's coming into this country, not just from 7 countries, but from any country. And so take the time to do it right now and don't continue down a battle with the Ninth Circuit. My dad served on the Ninth Circuit as one of the lone conservatives. You're not going to win in that court. Let it go.
Wow. Okay. That's important. Look, I wanted to get your comment quickly on Russia reportedly considering turning Snowden over to the U.S. as a gift. Your thoughts?
Well, I hope if Snowden is turned over to the United States, and certainly Russia should turn him over, that he is tried for treason because he is a traitor.
Okay. Well, that's certainly what has been talked about. Carly, there is obviously reports that you are considering challenging Virginia Senator Tim Kaine in 2018 for a Senate seat. Is this in the plans?
Well, first of all, I haven't made any decision yet. Second of all, in Virginia, we actually have incredibly important elections this year. So we have a gubernatorial election in November of 2017, and I'm working very hard for Ed Gillespie. We have an important lieutenant governor's race, an attorney general race, and so I'm really focused on 2017. Beyond that, I would say that the 2018 Senate race, the Republican Party has to make a decision. The Democrats are going to throw everything they can at defending Tim Kaine's seat. Virginia is a purple state. So while it's important that a candidate, perhaps myself, make a decision, it's equally important that the Republican Party decide they really want this seat. Because Republicans are going to have a lot of seats to defend in 2018. They have other Democrats that are perhaps even more vulnerable in deep red states. So the party has to make a decision about Virginia as well.
Well, we'll see if the people remember these stalling tactics going into 2018. By the way, where many of these senators are pushing back from states that voted in Donald Trump.
Well, that's right. And, you know, the Democrats, I think, are losing credibility rapidly because what they basically telegraphed is we will resist everything and everyone, anything and anyone. And so it's just rampant stalling tactics. I think they lose credibility, but that's clearly their tactic right now.
All right, we'll leave it there. Carly, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Nice to see you, Maria.
Carly Fiorina joining us there. So where does Congress stand in the immigration executive order? I'll talk exclusively next with South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. Follow me on Twitter at Maria Bartiromo, at Sunday Futures. Let us know what you'd like to hear from the lineup of guests we have this morning. We're looking ahead on Sunday Morning Futures. Reaction today continues to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision last week and the Trump administration's response to it. Joining me right now is Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee. And, sir, it's good to have you back on the program. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Your reaction to Donald Trump's response, where he basically says, look, I'll see you in court.
Well, what he should think about, I believe, is issuing another executive order that's modified. If the president really believes we're at threat from these countries, and there may be a good reason to believe that, I think you could modify the order with a new executive order that would withstand judicial scrutiny. But about the Ninth Circuit, they're notoriously liberal. And they're notoriously wrong when it comes to applying the Constitution. They get struck down far more than they get upheld. But in a 4-4 Supreme Court, I think the president should be very careful about appealing this order.
So you think that it was a weak response then?
Well, no, I think the president needs to make a good decision for his administration and the country as a whole. If it's 4-4, the Ninth Circuit stands. If I were him, I would issue a new executive order making sure that green card holders are not included and interpreters are not included in the ban, and I think it'll sail through the court, or wait till another circuit rules on the same issue, then maybe appeal, take that to the Supreme Court.
So do you think he ultimately wins if, in fact, this does go to the Supreme Court?
Most likely. I think the president has a lot of discretion, as he or she should, when it comes to entry into the country regarding national security. The whole idea of the Ninth Circuit would second-guess his national security judgment is a non-starter, and I don't think will be upheld by the Supreme Court. And it's clearly not a Muslim ban. There are Christians and other people in these countries that can't travel either.
I think that the pushback from the left on really anything President Trump does has been so severe. And now, of course, they are threatening not to nominate Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. They're refusing to vote for him just to get back at Donald Trump and the Republicans for not taking Merrick Garland seriously.
Well, one thing you can keep the tape here, Gorsuch will get 60 votes. There are enough Democrats on Capitol Hill who have a political need to seem reasonable where they want to be or not. Trump won their states. We need 60 votes to move to final confirmation of Judge Gorsuch. I believe we'll get more than 60 votes in his case because he's so well qualified. I'm not worried about his nomination at all.
How will his presence on the court change the Supreme Court?
I think you'll have somebody like Scalia. He's a man of the law. He's one of the most qualified people to ever be nominated for the Supreme Court. He's clearly conservative. He's in the mold of Anthony Scalia. So I think you'll see a continuation pretty much of what you got with Justice Scalia.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the fact that he was nominated unanimously the last time he was up at bat makes you wonder what's going on here. Is this just stall tactics? Is this just trying to push back on anything the president does?
Well, they lost the election. They're in the process of losing their mind. The bottom line is the left is gone nuts. They can't understand why they lost. They want to attack Trump at every stage. You see the emergence of a Tea Party type movement on the left, and I can tell you this. There's some Democratic senators who are in Trump states that if they follow the lead of the radical left, they're going to lose their job.
Let me switch gears for a moment, because there is a lot of conversation this weekend about the Muslim Brotherhood and whether or not the Trump administration should name the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. Do you think they should?
I think it's worth looking at, but you got to be cautious here because you have Muslim Brotherhood affiliated groups in the government in Morocco and Tunisia that have actually been very helpful to the United States. The CIA report is worth looking at and absorbing. So I would tell the president to talk to Muslim leaders, the King of Jordan, and other people in the region to see what kind of effect it would have on their ability to govern. Yeah, you don't want to make them martyrs.
There's a debate. A lot of people in high leadership positions, even in the Muslim world, say that that is a diseased part of Islam, and in fact they should be termed that. But what would the implications be?
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood has a mixed reputation. Clearly, they've engaged in violence in some areas, and sometimes they're seen by the populations providing services the government wouldn't provide. The bottom line here is the CIA report is pretty insightful. I would tell the president and his team to call the region, talk to our allies in the region, and get their input. What I would do tomorrow is designate the Afghan Taliban as terrorists. I would do that tomorrow. And
so much debate about this and so many other issues when it comes to foreign policy. You know, I know that there's been jabs back and forth between you and President Trump and of course, Senator McCain and Donald Trump. Do you think it's high time you guys went out for a beer and had a conversation or got on the same page about things?
Absolutely. I think radical Islam is a common enemy to mankind, that President Trump will have no better ally than John McCain in rebuilding the military. He should listen to Senator McCain, and Senator McCain should understand, as he well does, that President Trump is now our commander-in-chief. I want to help our commander-in-chief. The one difference I have with him really is around Russia. I pretty much see the world the same as the Trump administration when it comes to Iran, North Korea, China, but Russia is very problematic. I think the president doesn't appreciate that Putin's Russia's enemy to democracy and an enemy to the United States. And if you treat Putin as anything other than our enemy, you're making a mistake.
So obviously you're against lifting sanctions, but we haven't heard from the Trump administration on this and whether even they were considering it.
I hope they will not. I hope they will punish Russia more. They have not been punished for interfering in our election. They're trying to do the same thing in France and Germany. They're also undermining our efforts in Afghanistan. I was astonished to hear about the commander in Afghanistan that since 2016, Russia has been actively involved in undermining our efforts to win in Afghanistan. The reason being that Putin doesn't want democracy to flourish anywhere because democracy anywhere is a threat to him wherever he goes. So it's time to punish Russia. They're up to no good.
All right, we will leave it there. Senator, good to have you on the program this morning. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Senator Lindsey Graham. Coming up next, Attorney General Jeff Sessions gets to work with a contentious confirmation vote now behind him. We will talk with the former AG, John Ashcroft, about how Sessions will handle the fate of President Trump's immigration order. As we look ahead, we're also looking at a big week in financial services. We've got the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee on deck as well, Jeb Hensarling. Stay with us. Welcome back. Attorney General Jeff Sessions prepares to start his first full week on the job tomorrow. It comes after a very contentious nomination process and a confirmation vote that mostly fell along party lines. Sessions taking on his new role as President Trump's executive order on immigration remains in legal limbo. Joining me right now is former U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft. Judge, it's so nice to have you on the program. Welcome.
It's my delight to be with you, Maria. Thanks.
So let me kick it off with the latest, and of course that is that we are understanding that the Trump administration is going to do a new executive order, narrower. That's what Lindsey Graham was also recommending, and you say?
Well, I think there are two main concerns here. First is national security. And to address those concerns, a new executive order can probably achieve everything the president wanted to achieve with the first executive order. The other concern is the president's own authority, and the court on the West Coast has impaired that by issuing this temporary restraining order and refusing to lift it. And I think one of the things that has to be developed in terms of strategy is making sure that we don't sacrifice the president's authority in this situation. It may be that they'll want to continue to litigate the old executive order, and they may be able to craft the new one so that it doesn't render moot the questions that are related to the old one. But it's clear to me that the president has this authority. When I was Attorney General, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals sought to look behind my motives when I was doing a job which was clearly within the legal responsibilities I had. And the Ninth Circuit voted against me, but the United States Supreme Court said, you can't consider motives. If the person is doing what is legal, he is to be given the responsibility and opportunity to conduct his duties. And so the Supreme Court, in an 8-0 vote, sustained my position. I think the Supreme Court would be likely to sustain the president's position similarly, because he is clearly within his responsibilities. It is the duty of the president to defend the country. So he's defending the country, and if he seeks to make sure that we don't have a gap in that defense and enters a new order which can be enforced without controversy, I think he should do that. At some point, though, I think we need to affirm and establish his authority to defend the nation by acting consistently with the statute, which gives him the authority to limit entry to the United States by those who are not citizens of the United States.
Well, but I think you make a really important point, and that is the potential to undermine the presidency. I mean, most people were surprised that a federal court could actually stop an executive order from the president of the country.
Well, as it relates to the defense of the nation, the Constitution is very clear that the commander-in-chief is the president, and the statutory law, which has been followed by presidents for the last 4 or 5 decades, makes clear his responsibilities. So whenever you have the Congress of the United States and a statutory law that's synced up with the Constitution of the United States, the president is operating at the highest level of his power and authority. That's from the Youngstown Steel case, which was written by Justice Jackson after he was Attorney General of the United States. So we have that situation here. The Congress has authorized the president. The president exercises his authority in accordance with the authorization, and it's in as it relates to national security and the defense of America. And if the president believes, and I think he sincerely believes, that this is a matter of urgency, delaying and waiting for an outcome of this court would obviously forfeit some opportunity to defend America, which is an appropriate objective of the president.
And of course, we've seen the flow of refugees spike just in the last week, since February 3rd, since this judge's order came down. Let me get your take, sir, on Jeff Sessions. He is kicking off his first full week in office after finally getting confirmed. What are you expecting from the new Attorney General?
Well, he's a rule of law person, and so all the talk about the numbers that were involved in his confirmation and all that's behind him. And he will devote himself to implementing a program to advance the public safety of America and to provide the justice system that is uncontaminated by politics, but which relies on the rule of law. My first day at the Justice Department, Louis Freeh, the then director of the FBI, called me aside at the so-called Hawaiian Punch reception for me and said, I need to talk to you about something very important, and it can't be talked about in this room. We had to go to a SCIF, which is called a compartmented facility, so that no eavesdropping can take place. And he told me about the Robert Hansen situation. So before I was in the office for 2 hours, I had a crisis, and I think you have to be ready and to focus and to go to work, and Jeff Sessions is that kind of person. I think this presidential order defending the office of the presidency and also defending the United States by having the president's wishes on immigration and his judgment implemented, that hits his plate right away as soon as he's confirmed, and I'm sure he's been working on that over the weekend.
Wow, and as you say, so important to have it uncontaminated, given so many of our agencies have become politicized, as you and I have spoken about in the past. Mr. Attorney General, it's good to see you.
Well, it's always good to be with you. I wish you well.
Thank you so much, Attorney General John Ashcroft there. Coming up, the fight over Obamacare.
The facts are there is no evidence that the Affordable Care Act limited economic growth. As a matter of fact, after
100%
passage of,
wrong.
After
100%
passage
wrong.
of the after
100%
passage
wrong.
of the
Yes, my fiery debate with Zeke Emanuel on the Fox Business Network on Friday. Coming up next, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul gives us his replacement plan as we look ahead right now on Sunday Morning Futures. Repealing and replacing Obamacare has been a legislative priority for the Trump administration and the Republicans in general. The question remains about what that replacement will look like. Our next guest came up with his own plan, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Good to see you, sir. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So you have outlined the Obamacare Replacement Act to provide Congress with a health care plan which has conservative reforms in it that you think is ready for immediate vote. Tell us about the plan.
Well, what we did is we looked through a lot of legislation. There's been legislation out there for 10, 15 years that includes market reforms that most Republicans are for. I would say ours is the consensus plan. There's not one item in our plan that I think a Republican would object to. We legalize the form of sale of all insurance, meaning that we get rid of the mandates from Obamacare that prevent the sale of inexpensive insurance like catastrophic insurance. We help people save for their insurance. We let them pay for their premiums and their deductible in a health savings account that's tax-free. And then the third thing we do, which is a great idea that's been out there for at least a decade but has not ever come to fruition, is we allow individuals to join together in an association to have leverage to get lower prices and also to get protected against insurance companies dropping them or raising their prices.
Yeah, and the other thing is that you're protecting individuals from pre-existing conditions, which of course has been a critical part of what to keep in the current plan.
Well, what we do is we have a 2-year enrollment period under which that regulation would still be there, but it actually would phase out over 2 years, because you can't let people buy insurance after they're sick, or no one will buy it before they're sick. And that's part of the problem of Obamacare. Right now, young, healthy people are not buying it, even with an individual mandate. And what I've been telling my colleagues is when you repeal the individual mandate, but you still tell people they can get insurance after they're sick, it doesn't work as a business model. Blue Cross of North Carolina lost $400 million in the individual market precisely because people are not buying it before they get sick. They're buying it after they get sick. So they get what's called adverse selection in a group of very sick people. We can't have that, or we're not going to have a functioning insurance market. So we do have to change the rules back towards what the marketplace would dictate.
Tell us how it differs from some of the other plans out there, because, you've got Senator Susan Collins, Bill Cassidy, Shelley Moore, Capito, and Johnny Isakson introducing the Patient Freedom Act of 2017. You say that you think that your plan is really the one that everyone is getting behind. Are you going to be able to come up with something that will, in fact, be something that everybody gets behind? What do you say about Susan Collins' plan?
The problem with the other Republican plan is that it keeps your Obamacare taxes. I don't know of any Republicans, and I've traveled the country, I've yet to meet a grassroots Republican says, oh, let's keep Obamacare taxes. And it also says, their plan says that if you like Obamacare, you can keep it. So if the big blue states with large populations like California and New York want to keep Obamacare, they would ask Texas and Alabama and Kentucky to pay for it. That's a non-starter. I don't know of any Republican at any grassroots meeting across the country that would say that they want to pay for Obamacare for big Democrat states. So I think that one's sort of a non-starter. It's Obamacare light, and I don't think really it is a consensus position. The reason I argue my plan is a consensus position is almost every plan, including that one, has pieces of what I'm asking. Allow more freedom in the insurance market. Let people save and let people join associations. Their only complaint is that it's not going to continue some sort of big government subsidies for health insurance. But that's precisely what we as Republicans, I think, have been opposed to.
Yeah, and you also allow the purchase of insurance across state lines. Let me ask you about the cost of the plan. Last week on Mornings with Maria on the Fox Business Network, I spoke with Dr. Zeke Emanuel, of course, who was one of the architects of President Obama's signature legislation, and he said it has nothing to do with economic growth. And I argued it has everything to do with economic growth, because it's too expensive for business and individuals, and as a result, they clamp down on spending elsewhere. How does your plan become less expensive and become affordable?
Our bill would allow the freedom and choice and competition of many different types of insurance products, but mainly we would allow the sale of inexpensive insurance. Obamacare made it illegal to sell inexpensive insurance because everything had to have pregnancy coverage. Everything had to have 10 or 11 different mandates. We get rid of those mandates and let the market sell what consumers want, and that will drive prices down. Also, when you pay for your care mostly out of health savings accounts, if 30% of the public or half of the public were paying primarily out of a health savings account, they would call their doctor and ask how much something cost, and you would force transparency by having consumer interest in the price, and it works. LASIK surgery, no insurance covers LASIK surgery. Patients pay for it. The price has gone down every year for 15 years.
Yeah. What's the timeline here? We're now not sure what kind of priorities you've got in terms of Congress. I know that you've got Obamacare as a priority, but do you believe you will repeal and replace in 2017?
I think it has to happen in the next month or two, because, see, they can't get to tax reform until they're done with this issue, because they want to do tax reform through another budget. We're doing this through, the arcane rules of budget reconciliation based on a budget from 2017. That process has to be finished before they can start the next budget process, which we need to be immediately in. So there is pressure to go ahead and vote on repeal. And what I've been saying, and I think the president agrees with me because he told me he did, I think Tom Price agrees with me. I talked to him yesterday morning that we should do repeal and replacement the same day, and the replacement ought to be market type of reforms that unite us all, not sort of big government or Obamacare light proposals that divide us.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to be talking about, by the way, the tax reform package with Representative Jeb Hensarling coming up in the program. Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Let's get a look what's coming up on Media Buzz. Top of the hour, Howie Kurtz standing by. How are you, Howie?
Good morning, Maria. President Trump pushing back against the media again over coverage of the travel ban case, over the way terrorism is depicted, and saying that the media are abusing his daughter Ivanka over that clothing flap. And Nordstrom's also will look at whether the press is lionizing Elizabeth Warren after Senate Republicans shut her down on the floor. Sarah Huckabee joins us from the White House, all coming up on Media Buzz.
All right, we will see you in about 20 minutes. Howie, thank you. President Trump expected to have his pick for Treasury Secretary confirmed tomorrow, we understand. What can we expect from Steven Mnuchin and the kind of tax relief President Trump is promising for America's business? We're taking a look at a big week for financial services and your money ahead on Sunday Morning Futures. Next. Welcome back. Later today, President Trump will meet with his pick to head the Treasury Department, former Goldman Sachs executive Steven Mnuchin, one day before the Senate is expected to confirm his nomination tomorrow. This as Mr. Trump, in a meeting with airline CEOs on Thursday of last week, promised to unveil what he calls a phenomenal tax reform package in the next couple of weeks. Watch.
Lowering the overall tax burden on American business is big league. That's coming along very well. We're way ahead of schedule, I believe, and we're going to be announcing something, I would say, over the next 2 or 3 weeks that will be phenomenal in terms of tax.
Republican Congressman Jeb Hensarling chairs the House Financial Services Committee. And Congressman, it's good to have you on the program.
Thanks for the invitation.
Can you walk through what the tax reform package may look like as you see it? We were thinking, a lot of people out there, that this would be a top priority for this administration. And it feels like Obamacare and national security has taken the oxygen out of the room of tax reform. What will the package look like, and what's your timeline?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, there are several different priorities that the administration and Congress has, and we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So the way our budget rules work, you frankly need to do Obamacare reform, repeal and replace, before you can do tax reform. What I do know about tax reform is it will have a much lower business tax rate. We have, as you well know, the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. If there's one thing that is shipping jobs overseas, it is an uncompetitive tax code. So dropping the corporate rate, and frankly not just the corporate rate, but other business entity rates, is paramount to us having a healthy economy. Second of all, I think the tax reform plan, and I haven't seen the details, but I believe it will also be gauged towards simplicity for working Americans so that ultimately you can take a small postcard to fill out your taxes on, because too often we know that people are gaming the system. I think there will also be generous credits for child care. I think the most important deductions of charitable and mortgage interest will be there. But ultimately, it will be built for growth, it will be built for simplicity, and it can't come at a better time because our economy is still lackluster under 8 years of Obamonomics. We need to get it going, along with regulatory reform. Tax reform is one of the most important things we can do to lift people out of poverty and get middle-income people back on the ladder of success.
And I want to point out that many people see a repeal and replacement of Obamacare as one of the biggest tax cuts of all. By the way, getting rid of that tax on business. Will the tax reform package, do you believe, include a border adjustment tax?
Well, I don't know, and I'm not a Vegas bookie, so I know that Chairman Brady, my good friend Kevin Brady, also of Texas, has that as part of his plan. I know he's taken a lot of feedback now on that plan. Whether or not the final package has that, I do not know, but I do know that when the dust settles, we will have a far simpler, flatter, more competitive tax code. And I'll let him and the president figure out some of those details.
And of course, he joined us last week on this program to do just that. Let's talk about regulation rollback, Congressman, because last week on Friday we got the news that Dan Tarullo is stepping down, who was the bank supervisor. And of course, we know that the president signed an executive order to roll back regulations on business. How will that look different and move the needle on economic growth from your standpoint?
Well, right now, unfortunately, we have federal bureaucrats who are essentially in the boardrooms of our major financial institutions, which leads to Washington allocating credit along political lines. This is not good. This will not lead to a healthy economy. This politicizes credit allocation. Ultimately, what we need is greater capital, which is part of the House Choice Act, which is the replacement for Dodd-Frank. And so what we believe is that we need greater levels of loss-absorbing capital, private capital, kind of an insurance policy, so that we don't have Washington bureaucrats micromanaging our banks, which is, again, leading to the politicization of credit. So with Dan Tarullo leaving, as you know, he de facto took over the board seat that President Obama never appointed, that he should have. But what I think is it's led to an unhealthy economy. And so what we see is that entrepreneurship is at a generational low. We see that last year the economy grew at an anemic less than 2%. And we know that healthy is at least 3.5%. And I think with the right regulatory reforms, the right tax reforms, we could have an economy growing at 4.5%, which would lift everybody up. So number one, we need to make sure that bureaucrats are there to enforce the law, not make the law, and that all the laws pass a cost-benefit test, which is also known as common sense, and ask the fact, do these regulations impose greater harm on the economy, or do they do more good? The sheer weight, volume, complexity, and cost, particularly of the Dodd-Frank bill, is just crushing our community banks, making it more difficult for small businesses to access capital. And you can't create jobs without entrepreneurship and small businesses being vibrant. So I look forward to working with Secretary Mnuchin and the President on making sure that we have robust levels of private capital, but otherwise, let freedom ring, let the free enterprise system work.
I think you make a lot of great points, Congressman, and I know our viewers are looking forward to seeing that economic growth move in a substantial way on all of this. We'll be watching, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. President Trump vowing to stand behind Japan after North Korea launches its first missile of the year. How will the new administration deal with the rising tensions from the north? We've got the panel on deck on that next on Sunday Morning Futures. Welcome back. President Trump responding to reports that North Korea launched a ballistic missile into the sea between the Korean Peninsula and Japan. Mr. Trump saying that the U.S. stands behind Japan 100%. It comes as President Trump was hosting Japan's prime minister at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida this weekend. The missile launch would be North Korea's first since President Trump took office. The report's widely seen as a challenge to the new administration. We bring in our panel on that. Ed Rollins is former White House advisor to President Reagan. Julie Roginski is a Democratic strategist and a Fox News contributor. And Tony Sayegh is a Republican political analyst, the executive vice president of Jamestown Associates, also a Fox News contributor. Good to see everybody.
Good morning, Maria.
Well, I mean, obviously he's with Abe, and then they launched the missile on the same day.
There's no question Iran, Japan, Korea, others are going to test him. And obviously his relationship with Japan is critical. The one thing I would say is this is a guy who got elected on domestic issues and has basically in 21 days has been doing a lot of foreign policy stuff. And I think it's been very positive. I think one-on-one he does very, very well. I would say to him, stay off the phone, deal with these people head-to-head. And basically he comes off very well.
Julie.
I think that's partially right, but he has had a couple of very prominent foreign policy missteps over the last 3 weeks that he had to ameliorate, whether with Mexico or with Australia. Certainly now he's being prevented from speaking in Parliament in England, in which case he's postponing that trip. So from that perspective, I think he does have a lot of cleanup to do. The Abe meeting seems to have been successful. And again, North Korea is going to do what North Korea is going to do. The president, I thought, was foolish to taunt President Obama when they launched a missile test during the Obama administration. He'll see now that North Korea is not something that we can really control. China has to be part of the equation. You can't provoke China and then expect North Korea to cooperate when the Chinese won't cooperate with us on certain issues. There's a larger holistic thing here he has to understand with respect to Asia.
The North Korean launch is about domestic bluster as well for their regime, as much as it's also, to Ed's point, testing the administration early, which we knew they were going to do. But let's remember, this is not happening in a vacuum. You've essentially had America retreat from the foreign stage as far as a position of strength for 8 years. So Donald Trump has run on a very robust America first kind of peace through strength agenda, and he is going to get tested by our adversaries, Iran as well. And you already see, I think, him managing this extraordinarily well. I don't think he's going to take it laying down. I think he's somebody who understands the importance of a lot of strong bilateral U.S. relationships that have gone weak over the last 8 years. So the meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister, I think, was a resounding success for him. He's going to move forward and I think continue to rebuild the idea that America is the world leader from a position of strength.
I think we have to remember here that we are on day 21.
Right.
I mean, it is pretty extraordinary that the president has done as much as he has just in these last 3 weeks.
There's a lot of action. I think this is a learning week. I think this week he learned that he has to be very strategic. He has to have a planning process. He can implement a lot of things. He's got a lot of time to implement a lot of things, but there was a lot of activity this week. And I think to a certain extent what he really learned this week is the Democrats are going to be a resistance party. They cannot basically be a substantive party because there is no substance and there's no significant leader. They're going to fight him tooth and nail, and you've seen 2 cabinet posts today that just basically got passed by the minimum. Right. And I expect Mnuchin tomorrow probably the same thing. And I think to a certain extent that he has to get in his head, this is an opposition party. They're not going to cooperate with me, and they're not going to cooperate with me on the big issues.
Yeah, you wonder if people are going to remember this, Julie, in 2018.
Well, they certainly remembered when the Republicans did the same thing with Obama, and look what happened. They got the House and the Senate back. So the Democrats learned from the best, which is that if you obstruct, chances are you'll be rewarded at the polls if the president isn't able to successfully pass his agenda. I will say there's one more thing about this North Korea launch that is relevant. He backed off on his one China policy and basically reiterated the one China policy President Trump did.
Right.
And blinked in the face of the Chinese premier not taking his calls. It's not a coincidence that within 24 to 48 hours later, North Korea saw an opportunity to stick it to him because of the fact that they saw some weakness there with respect to China.
Also, no coincidence that he hasn't had his team in place until now. I mean, Rex Tillerson and Jeff Sessions now at his side, maybe they had something to do with the one China policy.
And sadly, it's been a State Department that up until now has been run by largely Democratic bureaucrats. Back to Ed's point, though, I think it was interesting this week that Rahm Emanuel, former chief of staff, encouraged Democrats to stop swinging at everything.
There you go.
And